I was 5 months pregnant when I collapsed in my bathroom, dizzy, shaking my hand pressed against my belly as the cold tile bit into my knees. The doctors couldn't understand it. My iron levels were dangerously low. My baby was showing signs of developmental compromise. I had taken my prenatal vitamins every single day. Then the lab results came back. Sugar water. That's all that was in my bottle. Someone had replaced my supplements with nothing but glucose and food coloring, and they'd been doing it for 8 weeks. My sister Emery had visited me constantly during those months. She brought me expensive prenatal tonics. She asked about my dosages, my schedule, my routine. I didn't want to believe it. Not my own sister, not over our grandmother's $12 million inheritance. But when the evidence was read aloud in court, the receipts, the texts, the forensic analysis, Emery's face went white. She gripped the table and screamed, "Please stop, don't show the rest." What the jury saw next changed everything. Have you ever been betrayed by the person you least expected? My name is Tara Sanders. I'm 36 years old and I run a small financial consulting firm that I built from nothing. For most of my life, I've been the daughter who achieved everything and was seen for none of it. Growing up in the Sanders family meant understanding your place early. My younger sister Emery was the sun, and the rest of us were just planets in her orbit. She was 3 years younger, but somehow she took up all the space in every room. When she laughed, my parents laughed. When she cried, the whole house stopped. I learned to be quiet, to be useful, to hope that one day my silence would be rewarded with something that looked like love. I still remember my college graduation. I was the first in our family to earn a degree in finance, graduating with honors from a program that had accepted only 30 students that year. I stood on that stage, scanning the audience for my parents' faces. They weren't there. Emery had called that morning with stomach pains, and they'd rushed her to the emergency room. It turned out to be nothing gas, maybe anxiety. But by the time they realized she was fine, my ceremony was over. I walked off that stage, a loan diploma in hand, and told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that lie for 30 years. When our grandmother Eleanor passed away 6 months ago, I thought the grief might finally bring us together. Grandma had always seen me differently. She'd call me on Sunday evenings just to talk, and she'd say things like, "You're the steady one, Tara. Don't ever let them make you feel small." I didn't fully understand what she meant until the day her lawyer gathered us in his office to read the terms of her trust. $12 million. Managed by First National Bank as independent trustee. And one condition that changed everything. The granddaughter who gives birth to and demonstrates responsible care for a child within 2 years of Eleanor's passing would be appointed beneficiary trustee. I was already 4 months pregnant when I heard those words. After years of trying, years of disappointment, I had finally conceived. I hadn't even told my family yet. But Emery had been trying for 5 years. 3 miscarriages, a husband who couldn't handle the grief and left her last year. She had lost everything she'd been reaching for, and now sitting in that lawyer's office, I watched her face go pale as she realized she was about to lose this too. That evening, I passed the bathroom at my parents' house and heard her voice through the door. She was whispering, but the words were sharp enough to cut through wood. She never even wanted children. She never talked about it. I've been trying for 5 years. I lost my marriage over this. And she just gets pregnant by accident? No. That's not how this ends. I should have felt afraid. Instead, I felt sorry for her. My sister had suffered real loss, real pain. I convinced myself that her anger was just grief talking. Over the following weeks, Emery began visiting me constantly. She brought expensive prenatal vitamins, asked about my dosages and schedule, and seemed genuinely interested in my pregnancy for the first time. I wanted so desperately to believe that she finally cared about me. I let her into my home, into my routine, into my trust. I noticed small things I didn't understand then. My mother writing in a leather diary, then hiding it when Emery walked in. Our grandmother's old friend Ruth stopping by to say, "Eleanor asked me to give you something when you become a mother. Not yet, but soon." And one night, Emery's phone lighting up with a text she quickly hid from view. 8 weeks later, I woke up exhausted again. I'd been tired for weeks, blaming work and pregnancy hormones. But that morning, the dizziness hit so hard, I collapsed on my bathroom floor. Hand pressed against my belly, I felt something I'd never felt before, true fear. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for a while. Why didn't I notice? The ambulance arrived 12 minutes after I dialed 911. I remember counting each minute on the bathroom floor, my back against the cold tile, my hands wrapped around my belly, as if I could protect my baby through sheer will. By the time the paramedics lifted me onto the stretcher, I had convinced myself it was just dehydration, just stress, just the price of working too hard during pregnancy. I was wrong. The emergency room doctor was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a voice that carried bad news gently. She ran test after test, and with each passing hour, her expression grew more troubled. When she finally sat down beside my bed, I knew whatever she was about to say would change everything. Mrs. Sanders, your iron and folic acid levels indicate you haven't been absorbing proper nutrients for at least 6 to 8 weeks. This level of deficiency doesn't happen overnight. Have you been taking your prenatal vitamins? I nodded, confused. Every single day. I never missed a dose. She asked about my prenatal appointments. I admitted that I had rescheduled my last checkup because of a major client deadline at work. The clinic was backed up, and they pushed my new appointment 3 weeks out. My earlier visits had all been routine ultrasounds. Everything looked normal, so no one ordered a comprehensive blood panel. I never imagined anything could be wrong. The doctor asked if she could see my vitamin bottle. I had it in my purse, the same bottle Emery had given me weeks ago. She took it to the lab herself, and when she came back an hour later, her face had changed. The kindness was still there, but underneath it was something harder, something angry. The lab results show that this bottle contains nothing but sugar water and food coloring. There are no vitamins in here at all. Someone replaced your supplements with a fake. The room tilted. I gripped the bed rail and tried to breathe. Sugar water. For 8 weeks, I had been swallowing sugar water while my baby starved for the nutrients she needed to grow. I thought about Emery visiting my apartment, bringing me those expensive bottles, asking about my dosages and schedule. I thought about her standing in my kitchen while I thanked her for finally caring. I didn't want to believe it. Even with the evidence in front of me, some part of me still wanted to believe my sister wouldn't do this. 3 days later, I brought the lab results to my parents' house. I didn't accuse Emery directly. I couldn't bring myself to say the words out loud. Instead, I simply asked if anyone else had access to my apartment. Maybe someone had broken in. Maybe there was another explanation. My mother's face tightened the moment I walked through the door. Emery was already there, sitting on the couch with a cup of tea, looking fragile and tired. When I explained what the doctors had found, she burst into tears. Are you seriously implying I would hurt your baby? After everything I've lost. 3 miscarriages, Tara. My marriage fell apart. I've been through hell, and you think I would do this to you. I stood there holding the lab report, watching my mother rush to comfort Emery, while my father sat in his chair with his eyes fixed on the floor. He said nothing. He never said anything. His silence had been his signature my entire life, and in that moment, I finally understood what it really meant. It meant he would never protect me. It meant I had never been worth the discomfort of speaking up. My mother turned to me with cold eyes. You're being paranoid, Tara. Pregnancy hormones can make women irrational. I think you should go home and rest instead of making accusations you can't take back. I left their house feeling like I was the monster, like I had imagined everything, like maybe I really was crazy. 3 weeks passed. My doctor started me on emergency supplements and monitored my baby closely. The developmental concerns were still there, but we were intervening in time. I tried to focus on that. I tried to stay calm. Then my mother called to invite me to a family dinner. She said Emery had news to share. I should have known. I should have prepared myself. But when Emery stood up at that dinner table and announced that she was pregnant, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. She held up an ultrasound image dated 7 weeks prior, and my parents erupted in joy. My mother cried. My father actually smiled. Everyone hugged Emery like she had performed a miracle. I looked at that ultrasound date and frowned. 7 weeks ago. But Emery had been visiting me constantly during that time, asking about my vitamins, studying my routine. If she had known she was pregnant, why was she so focused on me? Then I understood. Emery had been pregnant. The ultrasound was real, but something had happened between then and now. I could see it in the way she held that image, the way her fingers trembled slightly at the edges. She was showing them proof of a pregnancy that no longer existed. She had miscarried again, her 4th loss, and instead of telling anyone, she had kept the old ultrasound and continued performing. When our eyes met across the table, Emery's gaze was cold and steady. She knew that I knew, and she was daring me to prove it. I couldn't. No one would believe me. I was already the paranoid sister who accused her grieving sibling of poisoning her vitamins. If I said anything now, I would look completely unhinged. A few days later, Ruth came to visit me. She brought homemade soup and sat with me in my small kitchen, her weathered hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She had been my grandmother's closest friend for over 40 years, and there was something in her eyes that told me she understood more than she was saying. "Eleanor always worried about Emery," Ruth said quietly. "She told me once that child learned too young, that tears could get her anything she wanted. Your grandmother saw things others refused to see." I asked about the something Ruth had mentioned before the thing my grandmother wanted her to give me. Ruth shook her head slowly. "Eleanor said to give it to you when you become a mother. You're not there yet, sweetheart, but you will be, and when that day comes, you'll understand why she waited." After Ruth left, I made a decision. I needed evidence. I needed something concrete. I called my apartment building's management office and requested security footage from the lobby. The property manager was sympathetic and sent me the files that same evening. I sat at my laptop and scrolled through hours of footage until I found what I was looking for. 6 weeks ago, the day I had been at a client meeting all afternoon, the lobby camera showed Emery entering the building at 2:15 p.m. and leaving at 3:40 p.m. 85 minutes in my apartment while I was gone. The camera only covered the entrance. There was no footage of what she did inside. It was enough to confirm that I wasn't crazy. It was enough to know that she had been there alone with access to everything I owned. But it wasn't enough to prove anything. I sat in the dark of my apartment, one hand on my belly, the other gripping the phone. My baby moved inside me, a small flutter of life that reminded me what was at stake. I had evidence that meant nothing, and suspicions that everyone dismissed. I was alone. Then the phone rang. My doctor's voice was urgent in a way I had never heard before. "Tara, we ran additional tests on your baby. She's showing developmental delays consistent with prolonged nutritional deficiency. We can still intervene, and I believe we caught it in time, but I need you to understand something." She paused, and in that pause I felt my whole world narrow to a single point. "This wasn't an accident. Someone deliberately tampered with your supplements. I'm required by law to report this to the police. Tara, this is now a criminal investigation." The words echoed in my mind for days. Criminal investigation. Someone had deliberately tried to harm my baby, and now the police were involved. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than fear. I felt the first spark of fight returning to my body. Detective Morrison came to my apartment the following morning. He was a man in his late 40s with graying hair and tired eyes that had clearly seen too much. He took my statement carefully, writing everything down in a small notebook, asking questions that made me relive every moment of the past 2 months. When I finished, he closed his notebook and looked at me with an expression I recognized. It was sympathy mixed with caution. "Mrs. Sanders, I want to be honest with you. Family cases are complicated. Without direct evidence, placing your sister's hands on those vitamin bottles, she could claim someone else had access to your apartment. A maintenance worker, a delivery person, anyone. Defense attorneys are good at creating reasonable doubt." I felt my heart sink. "So you're saying there's nothing you can do?" "I'm saying we'll investigate thoroughly, but these things take time. We need to build a case that can actually hold up in court. Right now, we have circumstantial evidence and a lot of suspicion. That's not enough to arrest anyone." After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen and made a decision. I could not rely on anyone but myself. The police would do their job, but they were bound by procedure and protocol. They would move slowly while my sister had all the time in the world to cover her tracks. I needed help, real help, the kind that could dig deeper and faster without breaking any laws. I found Patricia Wells through a referral from my lawyer. She was 58 years old, a former detective who had spent 25 years on the force before retiring to start her own private investigation firm. When I met her in her small office downtown, I liked her immediately. She had sharp eyes and a no-nonsense way of speaking that reminded me of my grandmother. "I'm not going to do anything illegal," she said plainly. "But I can find things the police don't have time to look for. Public records, willing witnesses, patterns that might give them probable cause to dig deeper." You tell me everything, and I'll build you a map. I told her everything. Every visit Emery made to my apartment. Every question she asked about my vitamins. The security footage showing her 85-minute visit when I wasn't home. The fake pregnancy announcement built on an ultrasound from a pregnancy that no longer existed. Patricia listened, without interruption, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. Your sister was careful, she said when I finished. But careful people always leave traces. Give me a week. Patricia worked methodically. She started with Emery's public social media accounts, scrolling through months of posts, looking for inconsistencies. What she found was subtle but damning. 2 months ago, Emery had posted constantly about pregnancy cravings and morning sickness. Then the posts stopped abruptly for 3 weeks. When they resumed, the tone was different, more performative, as if she was trying too hard to convince everyone she was still pregnant. It wasn't proof, but it was a pattern. Next, Patricia visited health food stores in Emery's neighborhood. At the third store, she found a cashier who remembered a woman matching Emery's description. The woman had purchased multiple bottles of a glucose solution, the kind used to make homemade sports drinks. She paid in cash, but the store had security cameras. Patricia didn't take the footage herself. Instead, she documented everything and handed it to Detective Morrison. Now he had probable cause to request those recordings officially. The biggest breakthrough came when Patricia tracked down a woman named Danielle. She was a nurse who had attended nursing school with Emery 15 years ago. According to social media, they had reconnected recently. Patricia found evidence of phone calls and messages between them in the weeks before my vitamins were switched. She didn't approach Danielle directly. That would be the police's job. But she gave Detective Morrison everything she had found. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Detective Morrison. His voice was different this time, harder, more certain. We brought Danielle in for questioning. She was terrified, Mrs. Sanders. She's a nurse with a career and a family. When we explained that she could face charges as an accessory to assault on a pregnant woman, she agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity. My hands trembled as I held the phone. What did she say? Everything. Your sister approached her about 2 months ago, asking for a favor. She wanted to know how to make something look like prenatal vitamins. She wanted to know how long it would take before nutritional deficiency started showing symptoms. And she asked about medications that could prevent future pregnancies, something undetectable. I felt the blood drain from my face. Prevent future pregnancies. This wasn't just about the inheritance. This wasn't just about beating me to grandmother's trust fund. My sister wanted to make sure I could never have children at all. Danielle refused that last request. Detective Morrison continued. But your sister told her she would find another way. The text messages between them are vague because your sister was careful, but with Danielle's testimony explaining what those messages really meant, we had enough for warrants. With Danielle's cooperation, the police obtained warrants to search Emery's apartment, her laptop, and her financial records. The search revealed everything my sister had tried so hard to hide. Her browser history, even the files she thought she had deleted, showed searches for vitamin deficiency, pregnancy timeline, and how to cause miscarriage naturally. Forensic specialists recovered everything. They found a receipt from a chemical supply website for a substance that was immediately flagged for analysis. They were still running tests, but the preliminary results were consistent with what Danielle had warned them about. And most damning of all, they subpoenaed Emery's medical records. The documents confirmed what I had suspected since that dinner announcement. My sister had miscarried 3 weeks before she told our family she was pregnant. The ultrasound she held up at that table, the one everyone celebrated, was from a pregnancy that no longer existed. She had weaponized her own tragedy to compete with me. I read through the warrant returns in my lawyer's office, page after page of evidence documenting my sister's betrayal, her searches, her purchases, her lies, the medical records proving she had looked our parents in the eyes and announced a pregnancy she knew was gone. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there in cold, clear silence, understanding for the first time how close I had come to losing everything. My baby, my health, my future. My sister had calculated all of it. My lawyer set down the final document and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It was something between anger and sorrow. There's one more thing, she said quietly. The substance they found in her apartment. Forensics just confirmed what it is. It's not just something that could harm a pregnancy. Long-term exposure could cause permanent reproductive damage. She paused, and I felt the words coming before she said them. She wasn't just trying to end this pregnancy, Tara. She was trying to make sure you could never have children at all. The weight of those words stayed with me through every sleepless night that followed. My sister hadn't just wanted to take the inheritance from me. She had wanted to take my entire future, every possibility of motherhood, every child I might ever have. She wanted to erase that part of my life completely. I carried that knowledge into the courtroom on the day of the preliminary hearing, 8 months pregnant and more determined than I had ever been in my life. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, rows of benches that felt too close together. I sat behind the prosecution table with my lawyer beside me, my hands folded over my belly where my daughter kicked and moved, as if she knew something important was happening. Across the aisle, Emery sat next to her defense attorney in a navy blue dress that made her look almost respectable. Our parents sat in the gallery behind her. My mother clutched a tissue. My father stared straight ahead at nothing. The prosecution built its case piece by piece, and with each piece, I watched my sister's mask begin to crack. First came the lab results. The prosecutor held up the report and read the findings aloud. The vitamin bottles recovered from my apartment contained no vitamins at all, just sugar water and food coloring. A counterfeit designed to look real while delivering nothing. Second came the security footage from my apartment building. The screen showed Emery entering the lobby at 2:15 in the afternoon and leaving at 3:40. 85 minutes in my apartment on a day when I was at a client meeting across town. The timestamp was clear. The image was clear. There was no denying she had been there. Third came Danielle. She walked to the witness stand looking terrified, her hands shaking as she swore to tell the truth. The immunity deal had made her cooperative, but it hadn't made this easy for her. She described how Emery had contacted her 2 months ago, asking for help. She wanted to know how to make something look like prenatal vitamins. She wanted to know how long nutritional deficiency would take to show symptoms. And she had asked about substances that could prevent future pregnancies. Something undetectable. Danielle had refused that request, but Emery had said she would find another way. When the prosecutor showed the text messages between them on the courtroom screen, Danielle explained what each vague phrase really meant. The code words, the careful language, the plan hidden in plain sight. Fourth came the forensic analysis of Emery's laptop, the deleted browser history that specialists had recovered. Searches for vitamin deficiency, pregnancy, timeline. Searches for how to cause miscarriage naturally. Searches for substances that could damage fertility. Each search was time-stamped. Each one occurred in the weeks before my vitamins were switched. Fifth came the medical records. The prosecutor read them with clinical precision. Emery had been pregnant. She had miscarried 3 weeks before announcing her pregnancy to our family. The ultrasound she showed everyone at that dinner table was from a pregnancy that no longer existed. She had stood in our parents' living room, held up that image, and lied to everyone who loved her. Finally came the substance found in her apartment. Forensics had confirmed it was capable of causing permanent reproductive damage with prolonged exposure. It had never been used on me, but it had been purchased. It had been ready. If the investigation hadn't started when it did, my sister would have moved to the next phase of her plan. I watched Emery through all of it. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just sat there as the color drained from her face piece by piece, like watching someone slowly realize they have lost everything. Her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but she didn't respond. When the judge asked if she understood the charges against her, her voice was barely audible. Yes. The judge set bail at $200,000 with strict conditions. No contact with me, Danielle, or any other witnesses. GPS ankle monitor. Surrender of passport. My mother posted bail that same afternoon. I watched Emery walk out of the courthouse with our parents flanking her, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, just exhaustion. 3 days later, Detective Morrison called me. Emery had violated her bail conditions. She had created a fake social media account and sent Danielle a message that read, "You ruined my life. I hope you know what's coming." Danielle had reported it immediately. The message was traced to Emery's IP address. There would be an emergency hearing the next morning. I went to that hearing. I needed to see it. Emery stood before the judge in the same navy dress, but she looked different now. smaller somehow. The judge revoked her bail without hesitation. When the officers approached with handcuffs, Emery didn't resist. She didn't scream or beg or make a scene. She just turned and looked at our mother with eyes full of cold accusation. "You finally chose her," she said. "After 30 years of choosing me, you finally chose her." Then she let them lead her away. My mother sobbed. My father stared at nothing the same way he had stared at nothing my entire life. During a recess, I stepped into the hallway to catch my breath. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead and my back ached from sitting too long. I was rubbing my lower spine when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find my mother standing there, looking decades older than she had just weeks ago. In her hands was the leather diary I had seen her hiding so many times over the years. "I started writing this 10 years ago," she said quietly, "when I finally admitted to myself what Emery was becoming. Every manipulation, every lie, every time your father told me I was being too hard on her and I backed down instead of standing firm." She held the diary out to me, but not as evidence. It was too late for that. She offered it as confession. "I told myself I was keeping records in case things ever got bad enough. I just never imagined bad enough would look like this." Her voice broke. "I failed you, Tara. I chose the easier daughter over the better one. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just need you to know that I know." I took the diary from her hands. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. She had made her choices for 30 years, and now we were all living with the consequences. That evening, Ruth came to my apartment. She moved slowly up the stairs, her 78-year-old knees protesting each step, but she insisted on coming in person. In her hands was a sealed envelope yellowed with age. "Your grandmother gave me this before she died," Ruth said. "She told me to give it to you when you were about to become a mother. She said you would need to know you were never invisible to her." I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single page covered in my grandmother's familiar handwriting. "My dearest Tara," it began, "I've watched you be overlooked your entire life. I've watched your parents choose the squeaky wheel over the steady one. I've watched you achieve quietly while Emery performed loudly. I should have spoken up more. I should have protected you. I'm leaving the trust in your hands because you're the only one who will use it to build instead of destroy. You are the strong one, Tara. You always have been. I'm sorry I didn't say it more when I was alive. I love you. Build something beautiful." I held that letter against my heart and let myself cry for the first time in months. Not from grief, from being seen. Finally, completely seen. 3 weeks later, I went into labor. As the nurses wheeled me toward delivery, my phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. "Emery tried to make a deal. Plead guilty to lesser charges for reduced sentence. Prosecution refused. They're going for maximum. Trial set for 3 months. Focus on your baby. Justice is coming." I silenced my phone and placed my hand on my belly. Justice could wait. Right now, I had a daughter to meet. She arrived at 3:47 in the morning, screaming and perfect and alive. My daughter. Despite everything my sister had done, despite the 8 weeks of stolen nutrients, despite the stress and the betrayal and the fear, my baby girl came into this world healthy and whole. The doctor said it was remarkable. The intervention had come just in time. A few more weeks of deficiency and the outcome might have been very different. But she was here now, 7 pounds and 4 ounces of miracle with tiny fingers that wrapped around mine like she had been waiting her whole existence to hold on. I looked down at her face in those first moments, and I whispered words I had been saving for months. "You almost didn't make it. Someone tried to take you from me before I ever got to meet you. But you're here. You're here, and I will never let anyone make you invisible. Not ever." I promise you that. Ruth was there beside me, tears streaming down her weathered face as she watched us together. My mother was not. I hadn't invited her. Some boundaries are permanent, and I had finally learned to build them. The woman who had chosen my sister for 30 years didn't get to be part of this moment. This moment belonged to the people who had actually shown up for me. 3 months later, Emery's trial began. It lasted 2 weeks. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery with my daughter in a carrier against my chest, watching justice unfold one witness at a time. Danielle testified with full immunity, explaining everything she had told the police. Her voice shook, but she didn't waver. The forensic evidence was overwhelming. the searches on Emery's laptop, the purchases traced to her accounts, the substance found in her apartment that could have ended my ability to have children forever. Emery's defense tried to claim mental health issues stemming from grief. And there was truth in that. My sister had suffered 3 miscarriages, a divorce, years of wanting something that kept slipping away. I understood that pain even now. But the jury saw what I saw. They saw the premeditation. They saw the research. They saw 8 weeks of calculated harm inflicted on a woman whose only crime was getting pregnant first. Grief might explain where the darkness came from, but it didn't excuse what she chose to do with it. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon. Guilty on all counts. Felony assault on a pregnant woman, 5 years. Criminal tampering with consumer products, 2 years. Witness intimidation for the message she sent to Danielle, 1 year. The judge ordered the sentences to run consecutively. 8 years in state prison. A permanent restraining order preventing her from ever contacting me or my daughter. Complete forfeiture of any claim to our grandmother's trust fund. When the verdict was read, Emery finally broke down. She sobbed and shook and buried her face in her hands, but even her tears felt rehearsed to me. One last performance for an audience that no longer believed her. I watched from the gallery and felt no triumph. Justice isn't sweet. It doesn't undo what was done. It doesn't heal the months of fear or erase the knowledge that my own sister wanted to destroy me. Justice is just necessary. It closes a door so you can finally walk through a different one. As sole beneficiary trustee of the $12 million fund, I could have secured my family's future forever. I could have bought a mansion, hired help, never worked another day in my life. But that wasn't what my grandmother wanted, and it wasn't what I wanted either. I kept only what I needed for my daughter's education and established the Eleanor Sanders Foundation. It provides support for pregnant women and crisis survivors of family abuse and women rebuilding their lives after betrayal. The first scholarship went to a young mother named Maria, who was escaping a manipulative family that had tried to control every aspect of her life. When I handed her that check, I saw myself in her eyes. The fear, the hope, the desperate need to believe that a fresh start was possible. The press covered the story. Reporters wanted interviews, wanted the drama, wanted me to condemn my sister publicly. I gave one interview and said what I needed to say. My sister tried to destroy my future because she couldn't accept her own losses. The best response isn't revenge. It's building something she could never tear down. After that, I stopped answering calls. I had said enough. Now it was time to live. 3 months after the trial ended, a letter arrived at my apartment. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar but unexpected. It was from my father. I almost threw it away unopened. But something made me sit down at my kitchen table and read what he had to say. I have been silent for 30 years, he wrote. I saw what Emery was becoming. I saw how your mother enabled her. I saw you shrinking into the background while your sister took up all the space. And I said nothing. I told myself that peace was more important than truth. I was wrong. Peace built on silence isn't peace. It's just delayed destruction. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but you deserve to know that I was always proud of you, even when I was too weak to show it, even when I let them push you aside. You were the daughter I should have fought for. Enclosed with the letter was an old photograph, my father holding newborn me in the hospital 36 years ago. His face was younger than unmarked by the years of cowardice that would follow, and in his eyes was something I had never seen directed at me in my entire life. Uncomplicated love, pure and simple and real. Before everything changed. Before Emery came along and demanded all the attention. Before my mother decided which daughter was easier to love. Before my father chose silence over standing up for his firstborn child. I didn't call him. I didn't write back. Some bridges are too burned to rebuild, and I had made my peace with that. But I didn't burn the letter either. I put it in a box along with the photograph, along with my grandmother's letter, along with my mother's diary that I had never asked for but received anyway. The past doesn't need forgiveness. It just needs to be witnessed, then released. I sold my city apartment and moved to a quiet coastal town 2 hours away. I found a small house with a garden and windows that let in the sound of waves every morning. Ruth relocated to a cottage 3 streets over, becoming the grandmother figure my daughter would actually know. We share Sunday dinners now. We plant vegetables together in the spring. We are building the family that blood failed to provide. On my daughter's 6-month birthday, I sat on my porch at sunset with her sleeping in my arms. The sky was painted orange and pink, and the air smelled like salt and jasmine from the garden Ruth helped me plant. She brought tea and settled into the chair beside me, and for a long moment we just sat together in comfortable silence. "Your grandmother would be so proud," Ruth said finally. I looked down at my daughter, healthy and peaceful and completely loved. I thought about the 30 years I spent trying to earn a place in a family that refused to see me. I thought about all the times I made myself smaller, quieter, less hoping that if I just worked hard enough, they would finally notice. They never did. But I finally learned that belonging isn't something you earn from people who don't want to give it. It's something you build with people who choose you back. Some people spend their whole lives fighting for a seat at someone else's table, begging for scraps of approval that never come. I finally learned that the only table that matters is the one you build yourself. I built mine with solid wood and open chairs. There's room for anyone who chooses love over power, truth over comfort, and family over blood. My name is Tara Sanders. I am a mother. I am a survivor. I am finally completely enough. And this is not the end of my story. It's the beginning. Tara's story reminds us of something we often forget. The people who hurt us most deeply are sometimes the ones who share our blood. Family is supposed to be our safe place, but for many of us, it becomes the source of our greatest pain. If you have ever been the overlooked daughter, the invisible sibling, the one who worked twice as hard for half the recognition, I want you to know that you are not alone. Your feelings are valid. Your pain is real. And your worth was never determined by people who refuse to see it. This story teaches us 3 important lessons. First, trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it usually is. Tara ignored the warning signs because she wanted so desperately to believe her sister had changed. Sometimes hope can blind us to danger. Second, document everything. Whether it is a toxic family member, a manipulative coworker, or an abusive partner, keeping records can save your life. Tara's security footage, the lab results, and the digital evidence were what ultimately brought justice. Third, and most importantly, you have the power to build your own family. Blood does not guarantee loyalty, and shared DNA does not equal love. The family you choose, the people who show up for you day after day, those are your real people. If Tara's journey resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you find the strength to rebuild? Please share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what another viewer needs to hear today. If this is your first time here, welcome to our community. We share stories of strength, survival, and starting over. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Together, we are building a space where every voice matters and no one has to feel invisible. Thank you for listening. Until next time, remember, you are enough. You always have been.